Olivia de Havilland's worst enemy and fiercest rival was her sister, Joan Fontaine. And in her will, de Havilland left Fontaine a disturbing gift. Olivia de Havilland might have risen to glamour and glory, but her childhood was incredibly tragic. Born on July 1st, 1916, de Havilland's father abandoned the family when Olivia was still a little girl, taking up with his housekeeper instead. In this way, the future star got a taste of heartbreak from a young age. But there was much more to come. Olivia's mother, Lillian, was incredibly strict with both Olivia and her sister Joan. Though men loved the beautiful girls, Lillian made them ask for permission just to leave the house, and demanded that she vet any paramours. Not exactly a stable environment, and as we'll see, it would nearly destroy the sisters' relationship by the end of their lives. De Havilland always knew she wanted to be a star, but she had to go to insane lengths to make it. Her stepfather thought acting was disgraceful, and when Olivia got the lead part in a school production, he nastily declared that if she took the role, he'd kick her out of the house. Well, at age 17, the hard-nosed Olivia left home to pursue her destiny. It wouldn't be her last act of defiance. One of Olivia de Havilland's first starring roles was also her most scandalous. When de Havilland played the feisty Arabella in the 1935 swashbuckling adventure Captain Blood, her co-star was the young Errol Flynn, a dashing bit-part actor who would soon become a major star, and an utterly tormented flame for Olivia. Olivia de Havilland fell hard for Hollywood's original bad boy Errol Flynn the moment his roguish charm turned her way, but their passionate connection was doomed from the start. Though they lit up the screen as a golden duo, behind the scenes she kept her love hidden, tormented by the fact that Flynn was not only a notorious womanizer, but also very much married. Little did she know Flynn was secretly falling for her too, and their smouldering tension came to a head in 1937 at a lavish coronation ball, where a slow dance turned into a confession of love. But de Havilland, ever composed, offered him a brutal ultimatum: divorce your wife or we're done. Flynn, in a classic heartbreaker fashion, went back to his estranged wife instead, leaving Olivia crushed. Still, heartbreak turned out to be the prelude to greatness, because just around the corner was the role that would define her career. In 1938, David O. Selznick was casting for his upcoming epic, Gone with the Wind, and he wanted no one but Olivia de Havilland to play the part of Melanie Hamilton. And unlike the scores of girls who wanted to be Scarlett O'Hara, de Havilland knew in her bones she should be Melanie too. The set of Gone with the Wind was legendarily grueling. The cast sometimes worked 16-hour days, and star Vivien Leigh even overdosed on sleeping pills. Moreover, everyone but de Havilland seemed to think the film was going to be a total flop, and all their nightmarish work schedules would be for nothing. And then it got worse. Gone with the Wind tore through an incredible 3 directors before filming, with the first director, George Cukor, getting sacked suddenly and unceremoniously. De Havilland and Lee were so upset about the decision, they went up to studio head David O. Selznick's office in full period costume to beg him to reconsider. He refused, so the women had to go behind his back. Unbeknownst to Selznick, De Havilland and Lee both continued to meet with Cukor on their weekends off so he could coach them through some of the hardest scenes of the film. Good girls don't make history. De Havilland's hard work paid off, and then some. Though many today remember Lee's turn as Scarlet, back then all many could do was look at Olivia. Critics called her the standout of the film, and the part snagged her a Best Supporting Actress nomination at the Oscars. De Havilland's star was on the rise. De Havilland's most controversial relationship was with her younger sister, Joan Fontaine, who also became a famous actress. Ever since they were children, their mother nursed the girls to feud. Lillian apparently used to look at the capable Olivia and the sickly Joan and say, "Livy can, Joan can't." So when Joan rose to stardom, the claws really came out. Even as the young starlet, Olivia treated Joan cruelly. When Joan wanted to sign on to Warner Bros., Mama Lillian told the girl she couldn't use Olivia's studio, and even forbid her from using her real last name, De Havilland, because that was apparently Olivia's sole property too. Olivia never made a peep, and the sibling rivalry went from simmering to scolding. In 1942, both Olivia and Joan were up for Best Actress at the Academy Awards. When her baby sister Joan won, Olivia must have been bitterly disappointed. Still, she kept it inside and only graciously said, "We've got it." It was all for nothing. Joan rebuffed Olivia's attempt to congratulate her, leaving De Havilland stung and bitter. Could this get worse? Oh yes. In 1946, De Havilland got even more fuel for her bitterness when Joan talked to a magazine and made several disparaging comments about her sister for all the world to see. To make matters worse, Olivia assumed Joan would come to her senses and send her an apology for her thoughtless words. That apology never came. Joan Fontaine's bitterness towards Olivia wasn't exactly irrational. When they were young girls, Olivia was the spoiled favourite child, and she used and abused that privilege. Before Olivia gave any hand-me-downs to Joan, she would rip up the garments and force Joan to sew back together anything she wanted to wear. Yikes. According to Joan, De Havilland never would have gotten her famous part in Gone with the Wind if it weren't for her. Joan claimed that George Cukor actually wanted her for the part of Melanie. But when she came into the audition wearing chic clothes, Cukor tisked her and told her she was much too stylish. Then Fontaine made a fatal error. In response to Cukor's compliment that she was too stylish, Fontaine threw some shade at Olivia de Havilland, saying, "Well, what about my sister?" Fontaine later called this her tremendous mistake. Cukor pushed her further about de Havilland. Fontaine answered his questions truthfully, and the rest was catty Hollywood history. When Olivia de Havilland was trying to make it in Hollywood, the young Joan worked as her chauffeur. De Havilland couldn't drive, so of course the less favoured Joan was forced to ferry Princess Olivia around Hollywood Boulevard. Seriously, this was one dysfunctional family. And at the 1947 Academy Awards, they really let it all hang out. Olivia de Havilland and Joan Fontaine's feud had reached epic proportions by the time they both attended the Oscars in 1947. This also just so happened to be the year de Havilland won her first Oscar for To Each His Own. So she was in a triumphant mood when Joan approached her backstage to bury the hatchet. De Havilland's reply only added fuel to the fire. When Fontaine held out her hand to congratulate her sister on her win, de Havilland pulled the ultimate I don't know her move and turned away, acting as if Joan wasn't even there. The cut went so deep, the sisters didn't utter another single word to each other for 5 long years. But as we'll see later, their enmity only grew more tragic as time wore on. In 1946, de Havilland was finally ready to settle down, and she married cultured, literacy man about town Marcus Goodrich. Yes, she had a type that August. Yet, while Goodrich was her first husband, de Havilland was his 5th wife. The pair had one child, Benjamin, in 1949, but the good times quickly stopped rolling. As it turned out, Goodrich had your typical artist's temperament. That is, he was unstable, angry, and tended to take it out on de Havilland. Less than 5 years after the birth of their child, they had already split up. De Havilland didn't know it at the time, but she had a much more glamorous man in her future. In 1955, de Havilland found love again, this time with the debonair Paris Match editor Pierre Galante. After a romance worthy of a Cannes Film Festival movie, the pair settled down in Paris and raised a daughter, Giselle, together. Their relationship was so French, in fact, that even after they split up, Galante just moved across the street. De Havilland knew her worth, and she made sure everyone knew it too. As she grew into a bona fide star, she started getting sick of all the flimsy parts Warner Bros. Was throwing at her, and took the almost unprecedented action of turning down her assigned parts. That was a huge faux pas, and her old enemy Jack Warner got a brutal revenge. First, Warner Bros. Slapped de Havilland with several suspensions for each of the parts she turned down, signaling that if she didn't want to work in the films they chose for her, she wouldn't work at all. But in 1943, when de Havilland's contract was over and she thought she was finally free, Jack Warner twisted the knife in. Instead of letting de Havilland go nice and easy, Warner informed her he had tacked on 6 months to her contract to account for all her naughty suspensions, a tactic that other studios often used. Well, instead of lying down and taking it from Jack Warner and all the other industry players, de Havilland took them to court. What happened next was Hollywood history. In November 1943, de Havilland successfully sued Warner Bros. For unfair practices, and in so doing dealt a crushing blow to the studio system that had reigned since the beginning of the Golden Age. The aftermath of the ruling is still called de Havilland's Law today. That was our girl, but she paid so dearly for it. There was no way in heck the studios weren't going to retaliate. And now, Jack Warner really had it in for de Havilland. After his embarrassing defeat at the hands of his own starlet, Warner sent a letter to other Hollywood studios defaming de Havilland, which virtually blacklisted her from making movies for the next 2 years. Even though de Havilland landed iconic roles like Melanie Hamilton in Gone with the Wind and Maid Marian in The Adventures of Robin Hood, she didn't always have the best radar. Just after having her first child, she turned down the legendary role of Blanche Dubois in A Streetcar Named Desire because she couldn't relate to Dubois' selfish ways. Before Christian Bale made method acting look scary, Olivia de Havilland made it look cool. To play her Oscar-winning part of a cosmetics tycoon in To Each His Own, de Havilland incrementally lowered her voice as her character aged, and wore a different perfume for each period of her character's life. No wonder she bagged a statuette. De Havilland's sharp wit and her ambition were obvious even on her first feature film, the 1935 adaptation of A Midsummer Night's Dream. While on set, the teenaged Olivia impressed the camera crew with her questions on lighting and focus, and later used what she'd learned to make sure she was always the best lit actor in the production. De Havilland was always the sharpest tool in the shed. When she was a child, she learned to read before she reached the age of 6, and her mother often forced her to recite Shakespeare passages with perfect elocution. These hard lessons served her well. At the height of her fame, her distinctive, clear voice was one of her signatures. You'd think that as they grew into dowager stars, Olivia de Havilland and Joan Fontaine's feud would cool. But it only got icy hot, especially as their mother was on her deathbed. The siblings disagreed on how to treat Lillian's cancer, but when Lillian actually passed in 1975, de Havilland committed an unforgivable act. According to Fontaine, when her mother passed, de Havilland didn't even bother informing her. In fact, de Havilland had sent word while Fontaine was away touring in a play. But she'd sent a telegram that took 2 weeks to arrive, at which point it was too late. Yeah, that's not exactly trying that hard, Olivia. But that wasn't all. Besides not informing her sibling of their mother's death, Joan claimed that de Havilland didn't even invite her to the funeral. In a case of soapy she said, de Havilland's side of the story is even more twisted. She asserted that she did invite Fontaine, but Fontaine just brushed her off. For all that Joan Fontaine and de Havilland fought like cats and dogs, there could be genuine affection between the sisters. It was actually Joan who first called de Havilland Livy, a nickname that stuck for the rest of her life. In the end, de Havilland and Joan Fontaine's Hollywood feud ended in tragedy. On December 15, 2013, Fontaine passed peacefully in her sleep at the age of 96. After once quipping, "I married first, won the Oscar before Olivia did, and if I die first, she'd undoubtedly be livid because I beat her to it." Yet de Havilland's reaction was much different. Instead of using Fontaine's passing as a way to get the last word in, de Havilland issued a rare and heartfelt sentiment about her sister, saying she was shocked and saddened to hear that her family member and fellow star was no longer with us. Of course, de Havilland must have known that she'd follow her sister soon enough. As de Havilland grew older, she didn't lose her flair for the dramatic. When Catherine Zeta-Jones portrayed the veteran actress in Ryan Murphy's Feud, de Havilland, now over a century old, did not take kindly to the portrayal. The 101-year-old woman promptly sued the network for using her likeness. "I get it, Livy. You gotta stay in that news cycle." On July 26, 2020, de Havilland passed peacefully in her home in her beloved Paris, France, of natural causes. The screen legend was an incredible 104 years old, and many consider her passing the end of an era. She was the last true Hollywood star from the studio system, and she had one last claim to fame. Before her passing, de Havilland was the last surviving member of Gone with the Wind, even though ironically her character Melanie is one of the only main characters in the enormous cast to perish. The feat wasn't lost on the actress. In 1999, de Havilland said, "It's ironic, isn't it? Melanie dies and I didn't die. I haven't and I don't intend to." Hey, 104 freaking years old is about as close as that gets. Long before she passed, de Havilland wrote up a last will and testament for her sister and rival Joan Fontaine, and she left a disturbing gift. Let's just say their feud goes way back. At the tender age of 9, de Havilland scrawled out a will to Joan that read, I bequeath all my beauty to my younger sister Joan, since she has none. Ouch, Olivia. If you enjoyed this Factinate video, give it a thumbs up and subscribe for more incredible stories. Want to say in who we cover next? Join our membership program through the link in the description for exclusive perks. Your support means everything to us. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.